The tale resumes at the very edge of a dramatic moment, with Don Quixote and the Biscayan locked in a furious confrontation. Both stand poised with raised swords, each prepared to deliver a blow that could have easily ended the other's life. The battle seemed so intense, so vividly frozen in time, that any listener might believe the world itself was holding its breath. Yet, just as their weapons hovered in midair, the original account of their struggle ended abruptly, leaving the narrator, much like the readers, startled and deeply unsatisfied. The story simply stopped, severed mid-scene, offering no hint about where the missing portion might be found or how the battle concluded. This unexpected break puzzled the narrator for days. It seemed impossible that a knight as bold and memorable as Don Quixote would be left without someone recording his heroic feats. Every knight-errant in the ancient tales had at least one wise chronicler who followed him through victories and humiliations, preserving even his most foolish thoughts. It was unthinkable that Don Quixote, who had already proven himself more fascinating than many fictional champions, would be denied such treatment. And so the narrator suspected that time itself, so often the destroyer of precious stories, must have swallowed the missing pages. Still, one hope lingered. Don Quixote lived not in a distant age, but in relatively recent times. Perhaps his story had not been completely lost. Perhaps the people of his village, or those of the surrounding lands, still remembered parts of his extraordinary life. This idea encouraged the narrator to continue searching for any clue that might restore the missing history. He found himself increasingly obsessed with uncovering every adventure of the knight. Don Quixote, after all, had taken on a noble mission, wandering through fields and forests, righting wrongs wherever he found them. He sought to defend widows, protect vulnerable women, and confront the kind of brutal men or monstrous figures who preyed upon the innocent. In ancient eras, maidens had traveled alone across wild landscapes, trusting in nothing but destiny. The narrator reasoned that if Don Quixote had lived in those days, he would surely have been celebrated as one of their greatest defenders. This thought strengthened the narrator's resolve. He felt personally responsible for restoring the tale to the world, and, he admits, had fate not intervened, many hours of enjoyment and reflection would have been lost forever. The moment of discovery came unexpectedly. One afternoon, the narrator wandered through the busy marketplace of Toledo, an area full of small shops and colorful stalls. Among the merchants was a young boy offering old papers and pamphlets for sale. These were the kinds of scraps most people ignored, but the narrator, who had the habit of reading anything he could get his hands on, paused to look through the boy's bundle. To his surprise, one thin booklet was written entirely in Arabic script. He recognized the letters but could not read the language. Curious, he immediately searched for a translator. Given Toledo's diverse population, it didn't take long to find a Morisco who understood both Arabic and Spanish. The narrator handed him the pamphlet and asked him to interpret it. The translator opened the booklet, skimmed a few lines, and suddenly burst into laughter. Amused, the narrator demanded to know what was so funny. Still smiling, the translator explained that a note scribbled in the margin mentioned a woman named Dulcinea del Toboso, claiming she was known throughout La Mancha for having the finest hand at salting pork. The narrator's heart jumped at the name. Dulcinea del Toboso, Don Quixote's great love. Something told him he had stumbled upon the very book he had been searching for. Overcome with excitement, he urged the translator to begin reading from the start. When the Morisco turned to the first page, he translated the opening title, The History of Don Quixote of La Mancha, written by Cid Hamete Benengeli, an Arab historian. The narrator tried to hide his joy, fearing the boy selling the pamphlets might raise the price if he realized their worth. Without hesitation, he bought every paper the boy carried, and did so for only half a real. He later reflected that if the boy had understood the value of what he held, he could have made a small fortune. He immediately took the translator aside and asked him to render the entire collection into Spanish, faithfully and completely. The translator agreed in exchange for a modest payment of raisins and wheat. The narrator then brought him home, eager to keep the precious documents safe. Over the next several weeks, the translator worked diligently. When he finally completed the manuscript, the narrator discovered that he had indeed found the long-lost continuation of Don Quixote's adventures. What had once been cut short was now restored, ready to be shared. In one of the first translated pamphlets, the narrator saw a detailed illustration of the duel between Don Quixote and the Biscayan. The image perfectly matched the cliffhanger at which the original history had ended. Don Quixote stood tall, shield raised, sword ready. His opponent, the fierce Biscayan, sat atop his mule, gripping a cushion he used as a makeshift defense. Every detail was rendered with surprising accuracy. Even the mule looked like the inexpensive kind one might rent from a small inn. Written beneath the Biscayan's feet was his name, Don Sancho de Azpeitia. Beneath Rocinante stood another label that simply said Don Quixote. The artist had captured the horse's frailty so brilliantly, its thin legs, its tired posture, that anyone who saw the illustration would immediately understand how the name Rocinante suited the animal perfectly. Nearby, another small figure represented Sancho Panza, holding the reins of his donkey. A label named him Sancho Zancas, a nickname likely given because of his stout belly and long legs. These small touches convinced the narrator that the manuscript was genuine. What followed in the newly discovered text resumed the battle exactly where it had been interrupted. Two warriors frozen in a moment of intense anticipation. Both raised their swords high as if threatening heaven and earth. The Biscayan struck first. His blow was so fierce that, had fate not intervened, it might have ended Don Quixote's story entirely. The weapon came down on the knight's left shoulder with tremendous force, tearing through part of his armor and slicing off half of his battered helmet. Even one of Don Quixote's ears suffered a violent injury. The fragments clattered to the ground, leaving the knight bloodied and exposed. But Don Quixote did not falter. His eyes blazed with determination, and rage surged through him like a storm. Gathering his strength, he rose in his stirrups, grasped his sword with both hands, and delivered a devastating counterattack. His blade came down upon the Biscayan's head and cushion shield with such weight that the blow seemed to crash like a falling mountain. The Biscayan began bleeding from his nose, mouth, and ears. He staggered in the saddle, barely holding on. The Biscayan managed to wrap his arms around the mule's neck to keep himself from falling. But the terrified mule, startled by the impact, bolted across the open plain. With its wild movements, it eventually threw the wounded rider to the ground. Don Quixote watched the fall with a calm intensity, then dismounted Rocinante in one swift motion. He strode toward his defeated opponent, lifted his sword, and demanded the Biscayan's surrender. His voice, though steady, carried the full weight of triumph and anger. The Biscayan, stunned and dizzy from the blow, could not speak. At that moment, the women traveling in the coach, the ones whom the Biscayan had been escorting, rushed forward in fear. They fell to their knees before Don Quixote and pleaded with him to spare their squire's life. Their cries were filled with desperation, for they believed he would kill the man where he lay. Don Quixote listened with grave dignity. He assured them that he would grant mercy, but only on one condition. The condition was simple yet strange. The Biscayan must journey to the village of El Toboso and present himself to the lady Dulcinea, delivering a message from Don Quixote. The ladies agreed without hesitation. They did not ask who Dulcinea was, nor why this pledge mattered to the knight. They simply promised that the Biscayan would fulfill the command exactly as given. Satisfied with their answer, Don Quixote returned his sword to its scabbard. He had no more quarrel with the Biscayan. Though the knight insisted he had inflicted only the justice demanded by honor, he took pride in the fact that he had shown mercy at the lady's request. With this, the battle came to a close. The coach moved on, carrying the injured Biscayan, while Don Quixote stood proudly beside Rocinante, convinced he had added yet another glorious achievement to his growing list of knightly exploits. The narrator reflects that if anyone doubts the truthfulness of the tale, such doubts should be directed at its original chronicler, Cid Hamete Benengeli, the Arab historian. The narrator suggests that Arab storytellers were sometimes known to alter or omit details, especially when recounting the deeds of those they considered adversaries. For this reason, he believes the historian may have left out some praises that Don Quixote rightfully deserved. Even so, the narrator acknowledges that the account remains faithful to the events as they occurred. A historian, he insists, must be honest, impartial, and committed to facts. He must not allow love or hatred, fear or desire to influence his writing. History should stand as the mother of truth, the rival of time, the keeper of past deeds, the guide of the present, and the warning of the future. Thus, the narrator is satisfied that the recovered manuscript, despite minor imperfections, offers a trustworthy account. The story then transitions into the second part of the translation, which begins precisely where the first pamphlet's illustration had ended. The image now fully makes sense. Don Quixote with raised sword, the Biscayan struggling to maintain his balance. The moment becomes even more vivid in the written description. Don Quixote's attack is recounted with all the fury of a man fighting for both honor and survival. The Biscayan's mule is portrayed in frantic motion, its hooves pounding the earth as it flees. The second part describes the ladies in the coach, trembling with fear as they witness the brutal clash. It recounts their desperate pleas, and Don Quixote's proud declaration that mercy could be granted only if his condition was fulfilled. With the Biscayan's surrender secured, Don Quixote feels satisfied that justice has been served. He remounts Rocinante, adjusts his damaged armor, and prepares to continue his quest. The narrator reminds the listener that Don Quixote's mission was always guided by chivalric ideals, ideals long outdated, yet deeply rooted in the knight's imagination. His actions, though often misguided, sprang from noble intentions. Protecting the helpless, defending honor, and upholding virtue were the pillars of his personal code. The Biscayan episode illustrates this perfectly. Even in battle, Don Quixote behaved with a mixture of ferocity and formality. His demand that the defeated opponent pay homage to Dulcinea may seem strange, yet to Don Quixote it was the ultimate expression of loyalty to his lady. With the battle behind him, he rode forward with pride, convinced he had achieved another step toward the eternal glory of knighthood. The dust settled on the plain behind him, and the ladies in the coach carried the wounded Biscayan away, eager to forget the terrifying encounter. As the narrator continues, he explains that Don Quixote's adventures remained deeply intertwined with stories from ancient books of chivalry, stories he had read and absorbed until they shaped his entire worldview. His imagination blurred the line between fantasy and reality, allowing him to reinterpret ordinary events as scenes from heroic tales. The discovery of the manuscript, therefore, becomes essential not only for readers but for the narrator himself. He believes that without it, the world would lose a valuable account of a man whose mind and actions stood at the intersection of madness and idealism. The rest of the chapter emphasizes that even if the tale exaggerates or overlooks certain details, the heart of Don Quixote's story remains intact. A man wholly committed to living according to principles that no longer exist, yet doing so with unmatched sincerity. The narrator praises the manuscript for restoring the continuity of Don Quixote's story. It bridges the gap that had once left readers uncertain about the outcome of the duel with the Biscayan. Now, listeners can understand exactly how the battle concluded, what happened to the participants, and how Don Quixote viewed his own victory. Furthermore, the narrator highlights that true history should never shy away from difficult truths. Even when a character behaves foolishly or events unfold in unrealistic ways, an honest historian must record them faithfully. The recovered manuscript adheres to this principle, offering both the triumphs and absurdities of Don Quixote's adventures without manipulation. In doing so, it preserves the essence of the knight's personality, a mixture of bravery, delusion, passion, and unwavering commitment to an idealized world. The chapter concludes by emphasizing the importance of preserving Don Quixote's journey in its entirety. The narrator believes that his adventures offer both amusement and reflection. They remind readers that even the most flawed individuals can inspire admiration through their courage and determination. Don Quixote's confrontation with the Biscayan becomes more than just a battle. It becomes a testament to the knight's unyielding character. Though physically fragile and armed with outdated notions, he confronted challenges with a boldness that astonished even those who doubted him. The narrator expresses gratitude that chance allowed him to recover the lost chapters. Without them, the world would be deprived of a story that blends humor, tragedy, idealism, and human folly into a single unforgettable narrative. And so, with the discovery of the Arabic manuscript and its careful translation, the tale of Don Quixote continues. The curtain that once fell abruptly rises again, revealing the knight in full motion, injured, determined, and proudly convinced he has upheld the chivalric code. The ladies in the coach depart. The Biscayan is carried away to heal, and Don Quixote, battered but triumphant, retrieves Rocinante and prepares for new adventures. He believes he has won another great victory for Dulcinea, for knighthood, and for the ideals he holds dear. This chapter ends not with finality, but with promise. Don Quixote's path still stretches onward, filled with trials, confusion, absurdity, and occasional flashes of genuine heroism. The restored manuscript ensures that none of these moments will be lost again. For now, the reader and the world may follow the knight as he continues forward, determined to transform the ordinary landscapes of Spain into a legendary stage for his imagined destiny.